as I am, your grace has found me just as I am. If you had my life in your hand, life in your hand. Hold on, everybody, wave your hands together. Come on, let's proclaim it. Majesty. Oh, free I am. King of kings, Lord of lords. Majesty. And forever I'm changed, my life is changed. Forever I am changed by your love. It's the presence and the majesty. Come on, lift your hands, let's begin to worship in your own way tonight. Come on. Oh, come on, lift your voices. Come on. Come on, lift your voice and begin to sing your own melody tonight. Oh, he's a worthy God, he's a righteous God, he's a wonderful God. And he deserves the fruit of our lips tonight. Come on, come on, come on. He won't force himself on you, you gotta invite him in. Come on. He won't force himself on you, you gotta invite him in. Come on. Lift your hands around. Thank you for your
My name is Tim Lovett, and this is my American story. When I was in Iraq, basically a suicide bomber came up and tried to blow our truck up, and so I came back and kind of had a difficult time transitioning. I saw what the other guys were going through, and I wanted to try to make that a little bit better. One of the biggest difficulties that vets are having is when we're in the military, everything is a one-stop shop. What that Corps is trying to do is we're trying to strategically place people who've been through that transition and can directly relate to these individuals coming back. These men and women have sacrificed a lot and have gone through a lot, and they're going to continue to go through a lot because a lot of times we can't make it on our own. We need help.
Every one of us has a role to play in making our communities and our country stronger. Discover yours. Help us continue to make a difference in the life of our nation. Go to serve.gov and find the opportunity that works for you. This message is brought to you by the Corporation for National and Community Service.
This is Maurice Griffin, and you're listening to Guts with Nikki V.
Well, we're back with more Guts, Gospel United States, bringing the information for transformation within South Florida and all over the world. A variety talk show with a Christian point of view, hoping that you will have the guts to tell somebody about Jesus. I'm your host, Nikki V, and we do thank you for tuning into the broadcast. We're glad to have everybody in the room. We got a little sideline discussion, so I do apologize for taking a little time to get back to the conversation. But we appreciate each and every one of you, and we are delighted that you would all be in the room with us. Thank God for being the God of our salvation. And sometimes our lives do get shipwrecked, but we have to trust God. We have to rely upon Him, and we need to not make provision for sin, but to definitely cause ourselves to walk in the light of His Word or walk in the truth, to find ourselves caught up in God, not in our own self. And we do thank God for each and every one of you, again, tuning into the broadcast. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in ourselves and our lifestyle and what we want to do and what gives us pleasure and what makes us happy. And sometimes we don't even understand that God can make us happier than anything that we've experienced in life, but because we won't give Him any opportunity to satisfy us, we end up finding ourselves caught up in a world that causes us to be caught up in it, rather than being given to the purpose of God. So let's just go ahead and go back to our series, and we're going to talk about Paul, who sails to Rome, and he survives the shipwreck. And we're at Acts chapter 27, verse 39. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And they arrived safe. Now, the immediate preceding events take place at night. With daylight, the crew sights land, but they do not recognize the shoreline. Expecting to be run aground, as Paul warned, they look for a place where the ship's passengers might make it safe to shore. And we find that the crew ends up getting to the beach and finding themselves in the area of the beach, as opposed to getting directly into the land. And they see just a place where they can find themselves able to swim to shore or be able to float to shore, which is the sense of the phrase "a certain creek with a shore," or a bay. Various other ways you can define it. A beach has a gentle slope to the seafloor, which will allow the ship to run aground without being smashed at once by impact. With a steep underwater slope, survivors then can make their way to land. Thus, the crew decides to point the ship toward the beach, allow it to run aground, and then, with every man for himself, swim to shore. Now, that's not always the most best plan, especially when you're talking about dealing with people who are criminals. You don't want criminals to just go ahead and get out and do whatever they want to. You want criminals to still be kept in your custody. But this was a special instance, this was a special situation, and the survival of the people on the boat was much more important than whether or not they were going to escape. And the thought of their escape was something that they were able to put behind them. So they did the every man for himself to swim ashore. Now in verse 40 it says, "And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosened the rudder bands, and hoised up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore." Now, this verse represents the sailors' final steps in their desperate attempt to run the ship aground. First, they discarded the anchors, which were no longer to serve the purpose they had before. Initially, it was to drag it so that it would slow it down so that they would not crash, but now they need to make a crash. They need to shipwreck. In the original language of the text, the expression translated "taking up the anchors" indicates throwing those items overboard. Now, the phrase "loose the rudder bands" indicates that the rudder previously was tied down. This probably was done the night before to prevent the rudder's destruction by pounding waves. Now the rudder is needed for steering the ship to shore. Now finally, the sailors lift a sail into place. This lets the storm's strong winds carry the ship to shore. It's an all-or-nothing move. This is the Hail Mary pass. This is the one where you just say, whatever it is, we just need to do this because we can't stay here. We've got to do something. Where we are is worse than where we may be going to. And if it isn't, it's definitely going to be worse. So we would rather take our chances with survival than our chances here, which would mean certain death. But the sailors and their officers seem to be convinced that Paul's assurances are credible. So they trust him, knowing that the word has come forth from him, even though he is nothing but a prisoner at this point and has no credence to the people. He has already made several predictions which were accurate, timely, and true. After all, he had warned them of the storm before it happened. Paul's confidence during the storm, most desperate moments, suggest that he has more than his own power can to rely on. He had a definite, safe understanding. He had a definite position of understanding. He was not in the place of mystery, but he was in the place of knowledge. And that knowledge created a calm. And so they were delivered through the peril. So we now reach a point of transition between sea and land, between peril and deliverance. And sometimes in our lives we have a problem with dealing between the two. Sometimes we find ourselves not confident about who God is, and so we will stay in the peril rather than jump ship and go to land, where safety really is for us, but we just don't know how to escape the peril that's happening. We need somebody in our midst, like Paul, who was in the midst of those people, to direct the path, who could hear from God. And so we look to people to help us to direct our path to get to the place where we might be able to help be delivered from the peril that is before us. Verse 41, and falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the fore part stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. So they were able to save part of the ship, enough that the people would be able to be safe and get out safely. Of course, the last part of the ship was messed up and beaten up and beaten down. The ship now runs aground as Paul had predicted. The point of impact, described as the meeting of two seas, is a very literal rendering of Greek word that refers to the higher sea bottom between the two deeper pools. Today we refer to such a place as a sandbar. With the front bow of the ship buried in the sand and the waves continue to beat against the back stern of the ship, normally such an impact would force the ship forward, but stuck in the sand as the ship is, the waves break the ship's stern to pieces. Now is the time to abandon ship and make it for shore. They were able to get to the sandbar, which was able to get them to safety. And yes, the ship was run aground, and Paul had told them it was going to run aground, but at least this was a controlled shipwreck, one that they had the control over, or that God gave them the control over, that they might be able to get out of peril to deliverance. So I'd like to just kind of transition a little bit. We're going to take a break in a few minutes. But and pride as a sandbar, because we're talking about a sandbar, kind of just deal with that for a second. Ships buffeted by strong winds and waves on the open sea normally survive because they can give way to the forces exerted against them. However, if the ship becomes immobile, such as being stuck on a sandbar, there is no give, and the pounding of the sea can be very destructive force. Now, this was a situation with Paul's ship experienced. Figuratively speaking, the same thing can happen to people. There's a friend who is a great guy, but he sometimes has a tendency to take an audacious position, speaking without careful thought when questioned, even in a humorous tone. He may dig in and defend his position, even when it becomes clear the position is absolutely ridiculous. Once he has stated his position, he is willing to give it up. Other friends in our group have a great deal of fun lampooning his position and his irrational defense of it. Perhaps we can call this problem getting stuck on the sandbar of pride. How common it is that pride precedes our fall, as pride does not allow us to give way to the forces of reason. It's up to us to be able to see where we can go and keep ourselves mobile. And sometimes we shipwreck intentionally. But when we shipwreck in pride, we allow our ship to be destroyed. And we don't want to be destroyed. We want to save everybody alive. So now, in verse 42, and the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. This is what the idea is, because remember, you're running this thing aground so that you can save people's lives, but at the same time, you don't want prisoners to run away. These hardened criminals, these people who are going to be executed in Rome, you do not want them to be able to escape, because you know what your punishment is. Roman soldiers are subject to severe punishment, even death, for the failure to keep their prisoners in custody. Thus, the soldiers decide to put the prisoners to death on the spot rather than risk their escape. Hello, I've got to save my life. I'm not really worried about you. Such as a move is far too familiar to subjects of the Roman Empire, although